What is going on, YouTube people? Northeast Ohio Sports Cards here today for some Marvel Monday action. We're just gonna have a little chat today. I don't have a specific book or card or anything to talk about. We're gonna just talk general market stuff today. For those that don't follow both sides of the fence, if you will, the sports card market lately has basically been the bubble's been, it's not burst, but it's definitely letting a lot of air out. Some people might say that it's actually burst or bursting, but the sports card market in general, yes, there are still things going up, but in general is seeing a major market correction right now. So the question that's been floating around my head and others that kind of play on both sides, is the same thing going to happen to the comic book market? There's been lots of talk and speculation about, the comic book market bubble bursting. This is non-sustainable, this, that, and the other thing. So today I just kind of want to dive into that topic. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Just a little chitty chat. I got some charts and graphs, some pictures. We're just gonna a little chit chat. So YouTube stuff down below. Smash the like button, comment, subscribe if you're not. Another way to support the channel is use the eBay affiliate link for any purchases that you may or may not want to make. That is in the description below. With all that being said, let's rock and roll. So, up on the screen here, I have Luka Base Prism PSA 10. Now, for the comic book people out there, Luka Doncic is the star player for the Dallas Mavericks, probably one of the most popular young players in the league, and has actually probably been one of the main drivers behind the sports card market kind of taking off the last year to year and a half. What I have done is, and once again, for those that don't play in the sports card world, Market Movers is a fancy version of like GPA or cover price or anything like that, where you could chart prices and graphs and all that stuff for sports cards, different grades, compare prices, percentages, all that stuff. So I have pulled up Luka's Base Prism PSA 10. This is his base rookie card in the most popular set. There are, and get ready for this, because this is going to be a big crux of what we're going to talk about today, and it's a crux on what I've hammered on a lot. 17,000 of these in existence in a PSA 10. So think of PSA 10 as a CGC 9.8. It's not apples to apples, but for the purposes of our discussion, we will treat it as such. This chart I have ran back all the way to October of 2019, all the way through May 23rd, 2020, or 2021 rather. I'm recording this Sunday afternoon to post Monday morning. And as you could see, the sports card market was chugging along. It went up in the fall of 2019. This is all pre-pandemic because Luka started the season insanely hot, which really kind of sparked the sports card craze, in my opinion. Was him coming out like gangbusters to start his second season. That got the market warm, if you will. The season ran on, whatever. And then in March of 2020 is a few different things happen. This is pre-pandemic now. The pandemic exists, but not in the United States yet. We're not in lockdowns. We're not masked up, all that stuff. Prices really start to spike and the card market in general starts to go up, mostly due to increased interest and a lot of social media influence, in my opinion. Gary Vee and a bunch of others really started driving the whole, invest in collectible assets type thing, along with a bunch of other people. That caused prices to spike, as you can see in the graph here, the big bump. Then what happens here? The pandemic happened. People got scared and were like, wait, I don't want to have at that point in time $600 tied up into a piece of cardboard when the whole world might be ending. We don't really know what's happening. This was, right when lockdown started and the world changed for us all for the last year to year and a half. Then something weird happened. Everyone stayed home and had a bunch of extra money to spend and a bunch of time on their hands. And due to a myriad of other factors, and the comic book market followed this exact trend. After the initial fear wore off, people realized how much money they were saving, never leaving the house, and prices started to climb. Now, you see they go astronomical here late in the summer. This is when NBA came back and prices went ballistic. Think of a trailer or a movie coming out. Luka was hitting game winners in the playoffs. So basically, the movie came out. This here was all the trailer and the hype. Here, the movie came out to the moon. And in this case, they got eliminated in like the first or second round of the playoffs. I don't remember. So for the purposes of this, let's say the movie flopped. To use something that the comic book folks might be familiar with that don't play in the sports card game, which caused the market to crater, and then it pulled back at a new floor price. Now we enter the NBA offseason. It cruises along, spikes back up. Once again, think of this as the sequel. Trailers start dropping, hype starts building. This is the beginning of this past season around Christmas time. And then it does not live up to expectations, if you will, and the price slowly starts to pull back. Now, normally, it would level off, in my opinion, around here-ish. Right here. But there's been a major pullback in the sports card market lately, partially because there's a million different reasons. That's probably a whole video in amongst itself. But let's just call it the world getting back to normal and a bunch of other factors. I've been calling it the death by 1,000 paper cuts because there's a bunch of different things happening over there. One of the main reasons is the world returning to normal, thus causing the prices to pull back, pull back, pull back, pull back, and pull back. This is all the way back down to over the weekend. A bunch sold for around $800, $850. So reverting back to early July prices. And we don't know where the floor is. This stuff continues to go down. Now the NBA playoffs are happening right now. So, you know, there's some thoughts that players will start spiking back up again as they perform well and move on. It's tricky, but I know there's a lot of crossover in audiences, but I know that there might be a lot of people that are just coming to this from the comic book side. So that's basically been, I'm using Luka base PSA 10 Prism as a substitute for the entire sports card market. Other players' charts would look different, but to be honest, most of them follow a very similar pattern. Their peaks might be at a little bit different time, and how long they sustain for might be slightly different. But in general, you could almost follow this graph for the entire sports card market at like a macro level. So the big question is, will the comic book market follow suit? Now, in early January, right after the first of the year, January, February, March, the comic book market, while it was doing similar things to this, there was this slow build up throughout the lockdowns and stuff. So this section right here, come first of the year, it kind of went to the next level because you had an influx, in my opinion, of new money to the market. You had sports card guys coming over. You had investment level people coming over. You had micro share people coming over. Just a lot of different things happening. And that caused the prices to explode exponentially the last, let's call it 90 days, just roughly. But basically, since the first of the year, the comic book market has kind of gone to the next level. The big appeal that I've obviously talked about a lot is census counts and floors. So let's tackle the first one first, because this is all going to go into why I think a comic book crash, quote unquote, will be different. So the comic book census counts are much lower than sports card population counts. Like I said, this is Luka's main base Prism. There are 17,000 of these. I did not include two of his other main base cards. One is his Optic PSA 10, and one is his base level Select. If you add those two together, that adds about another 5,500 onto the list to take it up to over 22,000. And that's still not including a bunch of lower end stuff and a ton of higher end stuff. So right there, just off his three main base cards alone, we are at 22,000, over 22,000 base cards. That's a lot. That is a ton. So what turned a lot of us on, that were, some of us already dabbled into the comic book market, some didn't, and I think what pulled a lot of people in that maybe weren't even not necessarily sports card investors, but also just other people in the comic book market kind of doubled down, is the influx of people, and then supply and demand just kicked in. We're going to talk about a few books just to use as an examples, but you can kind of substitute these for whatever you want. Amazing Spider-Man 300 has been a major one lately that has just gone absolutely crazy. Part of the reason, and the biggest reason, in my opinion, all comes down to the census count. There's about 1,100 of these. First appearance of Venom, iconic cover, iconic artist, the whole 9 yards. Movie hype, it's got it all. It's got it all. One of the most popular Marvel characters, first appearance, a movie coming out, just checks all the boxes. And this book has really gone crazy. And specifically, we've seen a lot of late 80s, early 90s books go to astronomical prices. You've seen this, you've seen New Mutants 98, X-Men 266, a bunch of other Spider-Man keys, just tons of stuff. Tons and tons and tons of stuff keep going up. Part of the reason why, and I've made this comparison a ton, but there's only 1,100 of these. If someone wants one, that's what they have to go buy. There's only 1,100 of them. If you want the first appearance of Venom in a high grade, there's 1,100 of them. And yeah, there's high grade raw. I get it. Once again, we've been through this argument a bunch before. But on the basketball side, if you want a Luka base rookie, there's 22,000 to choose from. That's a big number. Here's the other thing. And this is no slight against my card collector brethrens, but in my opinion, comic book collectors are much less likely to flip stuff. Us card collectors are, and I use collectors very loosely. Don't get me wrong. There are some true hobbyists, but a lot of us are vicious mercenaries, and we just flip from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to be constantly building into something bigger, better, and badder. We are constantly moving through inventory, at least a lot of us. Some not so much, but a majority of people in my mind in the modern card market are just have very little to no sentimental attachment to a lot of their cards. In the comic book market, I don't feel that's the case. A lot of that 1,100 that exists of this ASM 300 are never going to see, I shouldn't say never, but the odds of them seeing the light of day are few and far between. Like, there's just a certain percentage of that census that I don't know what it is. I really don't. But they're just not going to get sold. They're in collectors' hands. They're displayed. They're a centerpiece of an entire collection, whatever. And it's not leaving their hands. It is what it is. It's just staying there, unless, life events happen that you absolutely have to sell it or something like that. But there is just a certain percentage of that. And here's where we start getting into why I think, if the comic book market sees a crash / correction / whatever you want to call it, it's going to be a lot different than what we're seeing over here. This is moving fast. This has dropped from $2,000 on Christmas Day to $800 at the end of May. The difference is, and it comes down to that census count. When you have 17,000 of something and everyone decides they want to start selling at the same time, you need 1 billion buyers to sustain a number. Otherwise, the prices is going to just keep falling. On this, you are going to see dips and pullbacks and ups and downs on an ASM 300. But it can only really go so low, in my opinion. There's only 1,100 of them. So the odds of finding an interested buyer are much more likely. The odds of the market getting flooded are much more unlikely because there's only 1,100 of them. And once again, probably less when you consider the amount that are in, if you want to call them true collectors, or in a collection, if you will, that are just never going to get sold. So it makes it very difficult for the market to just straight get flooded, where all of a sudden sellers outpace buyers and causes a major price swing down. Now, you are going to see movement. You are going to see pullback here and there due to outside factors. For example, as of the recording of this on Sunday afternoon, now the ending time of this auction was absolutely terrible, and it was an old label. And I know some people get a little fitsy about old labels, but a 9.8 white pages old label direct edition just sold right before I started recording this for 6,800. That's the lowest I've seen one go in weeks. And these don't come up a ton. I'm strictly speaking eBay here. These don't come up a ton on eBay. There's about one or two that end every week on auction, so not a lot. But once again, poorly timed auction. Sunday afternoon, it ended at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday, like noon on a Sunday. Time your auctions better, people. So I think that had a little bit of a factor on it, but still close to $7,000. Now, there have been some sales recently as upwards of 8,500 to 8,000. There was an 8,500. I think there was an 8,000. There was a high $7,000 sale. So it's a significant dip, if you will, on this book. But once again, I think there might have been some extenuating circumstances there. I thought it would get over 7K. I was kind of surprised that it didn't. But I think that could just be a little bit of kind of what we talked about with the sports card stuff. You know, the world is beginning to return to normal. And to me, from the comic book side of things, that's the biggest danger, is just people focusing on other things. But the flip side of that argument is the low census counts. And like I said, 1,000 is low. I know the comic book world doesn't necessarily view that. And I even view some of the higher census count books like a New Mutants 98 or an ASM 361, which are over 3,000 and 4,000 in some cases, as also being kind of low in the grand scheme of things. So you are going to see price pullbacks, but I don't think you're going to see it go from, to use this as an example, you know, it was, let's call the high at around 8,000. Some sold for higher, some sold for lower. Let's just average it out. That the high point for this book about within the last 30 days was about 8K. I don't see this just going back down to use the Luca, for example, it was up to 2K and is now down to 800. You know, so that dropped, what is that, like almost 60%? That would be like this going down to like 3K or 3,500 in the course of a 6-month period. Could that happen? I suppose. I don't think it's going to happen at all. I think it could settle back in at around 6,000, 6,500, but I don't really see it crashing, quote unquote, all the way back down to, you know, sub 4,000, where it loses half of its value in the matter of 3 months, 4 months. I just don't see that happening. Once again, because of the census counts. Also, a little bit of a difference, and this was the other very appealing thing to me. Starting at the beginning of the year, you know, the card market slowed down a little bit. And that's when I started putting a lot of money in. I've bought way more comic books this year than I have sports cards by a lot. Nothing crazy. Like, I think the most I've spent on an individual book might have been $1,500-$1,600 or $1,400-$1,500. Like my ASM 252, I think I paid $1,300 or $1,400 for. But I've spent way more on comic books because, and to me, this is the key factor. Yes, prices are going to fluctuate, but there is a base level floor built into this stuff. An ASM 300 is never going to go to zero. You know what I mean? There is always going to be demand for this book, no matter what happens, unless the end times are here and we're burning it for warmth in the apocalypse. This book is always going to have value, and a lot of other books. Once again, pick whatever key that you want to. And I'm not even talking about the stuff from, like, you know, not even like necessarily true grails, but like an X-Men 101, like a first appearance of Phoenix, or the one that's been really crazy right now is X-Men 129. That's the, you know, the first White Queen, first Kitty Pryde / Shadowcat. That book's been going crazy. And in a 9.8, the census count on that is sub 1,000, I believe. I think it's like 500 or 600. I could be wrong on that. I'm just going off the top of my head. So it's just really hard for things that don't come for sale that often for the market to pull back that much. And there's just always going to be intrinsic value to any of these key books where it's going to give you a buffer. So you might lose some of your profit. Like I said, if you bought into this for, let's say you bought this early, you bought an ASM 300 for $3,000 whenever it was $3,000 earlier this year, late last year, whatever. It spikes all the way up to 8,000. You don't sell because you say, it's going to the moon. It's going to keep going. And the comic book market softens and it pulls back. Personally, I just don't see that book ever going back to 3,000 again, ever. I really don't. Could it fall back down to 5,000, 6,000, 4,500? Sure, maybe. But really, I think the floor for something like that is probably around 5,000 to 6,000, in my opinion. I could be completely wrong. Once again, as I like to say around here, just the guy talking into a fancy microphone in his basement. And really, the microphone's not really that fancy. They're like $200. But just with all the factors being in there, there's only 1,100 of them. The Marvel machine is just cranking right now. And I know that this is a Sony property, but in general, you get what I'm saying. Comic book properties are just churning out content with Disney Plus and stuff now. It's just a never ending buffet of comic book content, big screen, little screen goodness right now. And they all, especially Marvel, they all feed into each other. It's a big feeding frenzy. And that's not stopping anytime soon. So that is pulling in a ton of new people to the comic book market and opening their eyes to this as a fun collectible, an investment, just a good entertaining hobby, all those different things. Even if 0.5% of people that watch Marvel stuff come into the comic book market, like MCU stuff on Netflix or Disney Plus or movie theaters or whatever, that's a massive increase of people coming into the market that have never been in here before. And that is why I was saying at the beginning of the year that the comic book market is criminally undervalued, and why I started buying as much stuff as I could get my hands on at any given time. Because when you looked at the census counts, it just did not make any sense. Speaking of quote unquote crashes, this is a good example. ASM 361. We talked about this last week. A ton of these hit the market. This is a very high pop or census count book, air quotes, at like 4,700, I think. And the trailer dropped last week. An absolute ton have been posted on eBay this week. A ton. Over 2 weeks in a row now. And it has caused a pullback. This book was like anywhere from 12 to 1,500 you would see it go for. Recently, I've seen auctions end right around $1,000. Why? Because the market got flooded. So you saw that pullback there because sellers outweighed buyers at that point. Everyone was posting them because they were trying to take advantage of the trailer dropping. As we've learned from the sports card market, you're actually better to sell before the actual event happens, because especially on, it's not true in every case, but in something like this, where in this world, 4,700 or whatever it is on this one is actually quite a few of those. I still don't think that's a massive number. The fact that so many got dumped onto the marketplace and it only pulled back a few $100s, I take as a very good positive, because it still tells me that there's a lot of people entering this market that have a hunger for this stuff. If this was the sports card world and something happened to, sub out Carnage and replace him with Luca, where he got hurt, and you have 17,000 of his PSA 10 prisms out there, that's a lot of people undercutting each other, and the price falls fast. In this case, 4,700 sounds like a big number, and it is. It's not massive, but it's there. Like, I get it, but it's still really not that big of a number compared to what we're seeing on the sports card side. And I think that gives a built-in buffer. So, is the bubble going to burst on the comic book market? I don't think so. It's not going to be a burst like we're seeing on the sports card side, where things are resetting all the way back to last summer prices. I think the comic book market is insulated by two very key things: census counts, them being relatively low and extremely low in some cases. And once again, I've been talking mostly about 80s and 90s books, not even discussing as you go back further to golden and silver age stuff where things are truly rare. That stuff's even more protected. I'm talking more about the 80s and 90s stuff that actually has some meat on the bone when it comes to census counts. That's going to protect a lot of this stuff. And also, you just have the ability that a lot of this stuff just has a built-in floor. A built-in price floor is going to protect a lot of these books just because of all the new people coming in, and intrinsically this stuff, these first appearance keys and whatnot, are just always going to hold value. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to smash the like button. Check out the eBay affiliate link if you want to make any purchases. That's all I got for you guys and girls. Peace.